Hello, everyone, and welcome to DevSecCon London. We're a chapter of global DevSecCon community and an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. So today we have the first event of the 2022 year for the UK chapter, and we're going to be joined by Jessica Cregg, who is a developer advocate at Launch Darkly, and she's going to be talking about the orders of magnitude, the challenges of knowledge distribution. But before we dive into that, I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Waleed, and I'm one of the community managers here at Sneak and the human working behind the scenes to make sure everything's running smoothly. So we love your feedback so that we can continue to improve. And you can find us on Twitter with DevSecCon by searching for it, or on our Discord server, which is just launched as well, and you can find that on the website, so do get involved. Discord is actually the best place to interact with our speakers and fellow community members as the stream happens, and if you haven't already signed up to it, you can find a link on the website devseccon.com, and also by joining the DevSecCon UK channel within the Discord server itself to facilitate questions for Jessica. If you're listening to the session after the recording, you can still ask questions over there as well. And I'll tag Jessica, and Jessica will get involved as well too. So once the session's over, you'll be able to rewatch it on the website itself, share with friends and colleagues, or hopefully both. DevSecCon is brought to you by Sneak, and our aim is to create a vendor-neutral space to share knowledge and best practices related to software security. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Jessica up onto the screen as well so that she can introduce herself. Hello, Jessica. How are you doing today?
Hi, Waleed. I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. 22 started a bit frosty, but we're doing all right. We're doing all right. Very, very excited for your session today. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm thrilled to be here to kick off the year, and hopefully we can look forward to some fun events throughout the course of 2022.
Amazing. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here and to kick off 2022 as well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to bring your slides up on screen, and then I'm going to scoot. Like I said to everyone here, do feel free to answer questions on the Discord or the YouTube stream, and I will kindly interrupt Jessica as we go if there are any questions that people would like to ask. Cool. Well, without further ado, Jessica, I'm going to skedaddle, and I will be back whenever we have some questions.
See you soon.
See you in a bit.
Hello, everyone. So as Waleed quite rightly pointed out, my name's Jessica. I'm a developer advocate at Launch Darkly, and we're a feature management platform that helps you decouple the process of releasing from deploying. So I'm here today to talk to you about thinking, working, and talking, and most importantly, how to prevent these three things from negatively impacting the other two. So let's start off with a question. When something goes wrong, what's your first instinct? Do you ask for help? You'd be forgiven for thinking that collaboration is the answer to your problems. Between the idioms of two heads are better than one and a problem shared is a problem halved, it's understandable to think that bringing another person into the mix could stand to improve your chances of getting towards a solution and, more importantly, getting you there faster. But going beyond language, there are many instances where we see this logic being actively reinforced. You know, if you're pulling something heavy or if you're lifting up something heavy, more arms equals more power. Same with tug of war. For anyone who's a fan of computer games, if you may have played Age of Empires 2, you'll recall that the best way to get your structure built quickly is to assign as many villagers to the task as possible. Now, when it comes to digital infrastructure outside of Age of Empires 2, and more specifically outside of video games, we have to factor in a few key differences. Now, the Mythical Man Month, you might have heard of it, it's a collection of essays on the craft of software development. It talks about the eponymous measure of the man month. It's a generally fictitious unit of the amount of progress a group of people can make relative to their quantity and subsequent time they have on a problem. Now, the idea that the number of people and the amount of time required to get something done can be interchangeable as commodities is only true when a task can be performed amongst many workers with no communication among them. Hence why the villagers of Age of Empires 2 simply just get on with it. But when a task cannot be partitioned, either due to its structure or complexity, the application of more effort actually has no impact on the schedule. And this meme comes to mind. Now, software development falls somewhere in between these two. The tasks can be partitioned, but communication is required between each subtask, and that's whether or not that's to hand over a task or to hand off a piece of work or to simply update the status, you've got to talk about it. And in these situations, the best possible outcome doesn't come close to an even trade of people or people hours. There are a few schools of thought around how cognitive load around communication is distributed. But it's widely accepted that intercommunication is where the majority of work lies. Now, if each part of the task you're working on needs to be separately coordinated, the effort required to complete that section of work increases to at n to the power of n minus 1 over 2. So to put that into real terms, that's like 3 people will require 3 times as much interaction as 2 people doing a task, and 4 people will require 6 times the amount of those 3, and so on. And things only get compounded when you need 2 or more people to be involved in that act of communication. I'm looking at you, department-wide meetings. Now, the result of this leads to the effort of communication counteracting the division of labour dictated from the original task, which brings us to a situation like this. The more people you actually put on the task, the longer it ends up taking you. This projected timeline, it shows, if anyone's familiar with Brooks Law in the Mythical Man Month, Brooks Law in action, which is like adding people to power to late software makes it even later. And if we're talking about laws, I don't think we can talk about collaboration without mentioning Conway's Law. Now, for anyone not familiar with Conway's Law, it's a phenomenon that of the manner in which we organise our team is indelible in the products and services that that team produces. To put that into kind of context, so this effect was first observed by Dr. Melvin Conway, who performed a famous experiment involving 2 different groups of people building compilers. So 8 people in total were tasked with building 2 different compilers. We had a COBOL and an ALGOL project, and 5 people were assigned to the COBOL project, 3 to the ALGOL. And it turns out, when the project's finished, the COBOL compiler ran in 5 phases, and the ALGOL, can you guess, ran in 3. So while the increase in people power was expected to lighten the workload, it turned out that the structure of the group and the resulting communication patterns effectively were baked into the final product. Now, when you think of this law in the context of an entire company, it's no surprise that projects can become convoluted, unwieldy, and at times completely incomplete. And this effect of organizational determinism introduces an interesting and difficult to resolve constant into the mix here. Now, how do we design teams that aren't hindered by Conway's Law as a near inevitability? Just going to take some coffee. Because caffeine. So, how do we do this? Please tell me on Discord. But I've got a couple of ideas, so you, feel free to chime in. Let me know what you think. I'm sure you've heard of the Amazon pizza rule. This wouldn't be a tech talk if it didn't refer to one fabled FANG practice. But a quick recap in case you're not familiar. So there's a practice at Amazon dictates that all teams must be small enough to be fed by 2 large pizzas in a sort of takeaway order. Now, instead of turning this idea into a thought experiment on what constitutes an ethical pizza serving size, the point here is to adhere to team sizes, and this is communicated across the board. Matthew Skelton, the author of Team Topologies, he supports this idea, saying that teams should be a maximum of around about 9 people. But the idea is less about takeaway and more about defining small and giving it a value. And why is a specific number of people in your team important? Why can't you just scale the team relative to the task? I mean, we've been through that a little bit already, but a specific number is important because we are creatures that are bound by limitations. Now, whether your team is composed of introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, the number of quality relationships we can form and maintain, according to British anthropologist Robert and Dunbar, is actually 150. It's a constant. And although there's been a lot of dispute over this number, we can recognize more people, we can interact with a great deal more, but functioning teams require quality relationships. So we've got a number of people that want to be involved in our project, and we know why that can't increase. But what criteria do we use to whittle down the number of participants? We need to go by ability. So the DevOps Handbook, authored by Sneak's very own Patrick Dubois, cites that silos tend to occur when teams become over-specialized. As tempting as it can be to fill your team with a diverse set of specialists, like a Hollywood heist movie, the getaway driver, the lockpicker, the acrobat, depending on the nature of your group's focus, there's scope for the skill set of the team to become too disparate, and a complication enters the mix where you need to form a common vocabulary, a shared language, and for teams composed entirely of specialists, communication comes with that added difficulty. It means that not only do you need to understand each other, but you end up adding a significant amount of cognitive load to the kickoff phase. Now, that being said, anyone who's worked to L3 to 5 or reached staff level in their role will know that you often need to find your niche as a technologist or an engineer in order to progress. Nearly didn't get that word out there. But for someone to earn a spot in your team, you ideally want them to have the reputation of a specialist, but with the capabilities of a generalist. Now, as technologists and engineers, we continuously hedge our own bets to, we hedge our own ability to acquire new knowledge. So by that, I mean, we bet on ourselves to be able to figure out the next thing we need to learn. Embarking on your team project will require you to enact this mission in a group capacity. So you want your team to be unafraid of new territory, and most importantly, to be cognizant of their own learning style and have optimal techniques of doing so. On that note, let's talk about the concept of collective intelligence. Now, as a term, collective intelligence has been described by researchers as a group's capacity to perform across a wide range of skills. And despite the empirical evidence and utility of collective intelligence as an index of group level competence, it's a fairly new concept. The spread of misinformation en masse, we've seen it. It's proven that the inverse can exist. It's possible for us to be collectively uninformed. But there are a bunch of recent studies that are looking into what it means for us to achieve collective intelligence. One of which, performed back in 2017, prior to the pandemic, used a vehicle of massive online battle arena game League of Legends as a method of testing out whether or not virtual teams can be paired based on their ability and outperform those with an in-depth understanding of one another. It's quite fitting that we're doing on the Discord. If anyone's playing League of Legends now and is in the voice channel, I hope you can take on these tips to win, to secure your win. But now, what the hell has League of Legends got to do with work? Well, massive online battle arena games are often characterized by their intensity. You need to make decisions fast, and they're ultimately at their core, they're competitive, which is it's not unusual in real world organizations. The spread of decision making in a vast array of businesses is only accelerating. It's forcing us to be in the position to make decisions on the daily to guarantee survival and success of who we are and what our positions and what we're working on. So the time and the space for communication is becoming increasingly precious. So what did these studies find and why is it important? So when investigating the measure of collective intelligence, researchers found that a group's ability to be able to perform a task well was largely transferable, meaning if they could do one thing well, they were likely to do other things well too. And that's in the collective intelligence sense. And secondly, the measure of a group's collective intelligence is impacted by both their individual attributes and also the manner by which the group is organized. So structures do matter. Now, the things that make us collectively intelligent are social perceptiveness, a moderate level of cognitive diversity, and large amounts of equal distribution of communication. Or large amounts of communication and equal distribution of that communication. So we've got to talk a lot. And everyone's got to be talking. You'd think, right? But it turns out that talking wasn't the communication that was securing the win. So most most noticeably, they noticed that decision equity and verbal communication didn't equate to a high level of collective intelligence. In fact, researchers measured that the standard deviation of both the lines of chat and the word count in those chat messages, uh, the increase of the chat volume had a negative correlation to the collective intelligence and the hireability of the teams. So it turns out that the most skilled players tended to spend less time communicating by preference. They didn't want to switch. They didn't want to context switch. They're good at the game, and that's what they want to spend their time, and they end up getting quite zoned in. But they also notice non-verbal cues quite instinctively. So this means that communication is definitely happening in these high-performing teams, but it's not in the chat box. So tacit communication mentioned here is the unexpressed recognition of the position of others, at least to the strategies of common activity, like a nod, a wink, a notification. It doesn't always need to be a discussion. In the context of a company, this is evidence advocating for observability measures, automation, opting for metrics that everyone genuinely understands. And at its core, we write code as instructions. Architectural decisions are but an order of service. We're fundamentally dealing with communication patterns built on top of communication patterns. And this is abundantly clear when we're debugging a problem, attempting to decipher an error message. Don't know who else has been there, but an error message is the ultimate form of communication in that sense, of the taste of communication anyway. So the common goal here is that you're achieving really efficient understanding. As a UK-based consultant and famed inventor of BDD, business-driven development, please tell me if I'm wrong in the chat. Daniel Tejas North once famously said when speaking about microservices is that we should aim to create software that fits inside your head, or it's been paraphrased, software that fits inside our heads. And that's because if we don't understand the software we're testing, we're likely to restrict the number of times we deploy. If anyone's read Accelerate, I'm sure everyone has, because it is now required reading. Or if you follow the annual State of DevOps reports, you'll know that high performers aim to optimize on these 4 key metrics. So that is all of which you want to lower apart from deployment frequency, which you want to be as high as possible. That can only happen if everyone has a common understanding of what's going on without having to talk about it. Now, if the software we're working on can't speak anymore. I think I've lost my voice. Hold on. Okay. Now, if the software we're working on doesn't fit neatly inside of our heads, and we can't talk about it like I shortly won't be able to, these metrics will have a near finite value. We're likely to distrust our tests in the first instance if we don't know what's going on. Why is it passing? Our confidence to deploy will plummet if we don't understand the services that we're working on, and we won't be able to restore them quickly. So there goes our MTTR. Software that is too big for our heads works against organizational agility. If we don't know how to wield the weapon that we're building, then how can we operate it? It's often because the cognitive load is too high, right? Now, the cognitive load is, by definition, it's the total amount of mental effort used in the working memory. And there are famously three main types of cognitive load. You've got the intrinsic, which is a skill. So that's how, like, say in Java, that's like how a class is defined. You approach a project and you know that. And it's relative to knowledge, and it's what you bring to a task or a project. The second one is extraneous, so that's relative to the task at hand. So that's the mechanism by which you're doing something. So that's like how you're deploying your application. And then germane, this is all cited really awesomely in team topologies, which if you haven't read it, I'll throw a link out afterwards. And domain cognitive load, which is relative to the translation of your learnings into your long-term memory from your working memory. So it's like your domain knowledge. So how how a messaging protocol works. So in team topologies, which if you haven't read, it's just excellent and has gotten my year off to a great start. Skelton argues, one of the authors argues that we should limit the size of our software services and products to match the cognitive load that the team can handle, given that this is finite. Now, if we can lower this finite value to be as low as possible without hindering the active communication, the systems we've instilled in our teams, and more importantly, the way we've constructed these teams, should safeguard us from failure and guide us towards better efficiency. If there's anyone who knows about efficiency, it's James Clear, Atomic Habits, talk about required reading. And what we want to do is we want to lower the cognitive load required by each action, and in the process, strengthen our systems. So we've got something to fall back on. So that might seem like a lot of disparate information and a lot of kind of differing advice. But if we put it all together, what we want to do is we want to keep teams small. Remember the 2 pizza rule. Come up with a specific number and stick to that. And keep these teams cross-functional, with each team member intentionally chosen to help you force the final principle at the bottom here. So take on people with the reputation of specialists, they're specialist areas, but they're adept at acquiring new knowledge. They can learn and they can catch up and they can morph into what you need them to. You need to enable unspoken communication. Remember that League of Legends study? And recall that code and PRs, we're dealing with forms of communication here, so we need to use them to the best of our ability. And finally, we need to lower cognitive loads. So cognitive loads need to be kept so low that everyone knows what to do. And this helps us strengthen our systems, and when we communicate, it means it's more meaningful. That's me. Thank you very much. That's my talk on how to hopefully not have headaches at work. I've been Jessica Cregg, I still am, and please contact me if you like these slides or these resources. Thank you so much for having me, Walid.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I've throughout this session, just hearing what you're talking about, just sort of taking a long hard look at so I used to be a product manager, and sort of thinking about how we did things, how we are doing things here at Sneak and everything as well, and just sort of trying to pick up what you're talking about here. And I've actually got purely selfishly got a couple of things to ask you here. So you talk about having small teams and maintaining a small team environment to be able to work more effectively and more efficiently, right? So I guess that may not be something that's immediately natural to a lot of organizations or a lot of companies who are either starting up or have been working in a certain way for a long time. So how would you advise companies or businesses or teams or incubators, whatever you want to call them, to be able to embrace a sort of more small team approach to things?
Totally. It's really difficult, especially if you're not used to doing it. And it's one of those changes where I'm thinking of the context of a big company. It's difficult to do it without embracing it fully. We've recently embraced, I said recently, I think it's been about 8 months now, embraced the sort of squad model. So it's dividing up everyone into different problems, but then grading, taking a look at which problems require enablement teams and which problems require supporting teams, and streaming those, making sure you have a couple of teams that sit across the entire delivery stream and some that touch only 2 key streams. So when we chat later, actually, I can send over a couple of. I'm sure you've seen a lot of fun diagrams in this sort of vein, but I think part of it is you've got to embrace it across the stream, and you've got to kind of make sure that each team stays accountable. And you've also got to ensure that each team is set up for success by making sure that some teams are just enabled to like make things better. You've got that 20% rule where 20% of your work is going towards making the overall work better. I don't know if that was just a lot of words, but I hope
No, no, it wasn't a lot of work. I think I find what you said about accountability really interesting, because that's something that, a lot of teams want to have, but also sometimes in practice it can be a bit difficult, especially with things like shipping things very quickly. And you also mentioned, like, for example, the 20% rule of like having that 20% time dedicated to fixing and maintaining things within your own remit. How do you almost shake, like, how do you implement that? Because that's a pretty difficult thing to do sometimes, because every single team in the world is always under pressure to ship things as quickly as they can. So how do you enforce that accountability in that 20%?
I think it comes with I don't know whether or not this is a very positive and good answer, but I think a lot of times we get forced into it, because if we don't put in that maintenance and repair work, a burnout can really quickly happen among teams, right? If you're just throwing everything at delivering and not throwing some effort at maintenance. And I think also when you bring on new people into a team, they come with that added um, fresh perspective and the desire to contribute and do things better. And that comes with that beginner's mindset of like looking at the stream as a whole and being like, wait a second, why is that thing falling down this hole here? So I feel like if you're growing and if you're progressing, you kind of get forced into it. But I did, have you seen teams that have you seen any good ways of making sure that the work happens?
So, not to inspire any kind of god complex or anything like that, but as a former product manager, it was always very important for me and my engineering manager to have that level of autonomy together,
Mhm.
where we would ensure that we reserve time for. I mean, I don't want to call it technical debt. I don't believe in the term technical debt. That sort of time to make sure that your product is forming as effectively as possible, and that you have
Mhm.
that scalability that you need through that too. So it's almost inspiring that culture from the top down, as well
Nice.
as like just because I feel like with something like that, like where your developers like, we really need to maintain some stuff, we really need to sort of fix a lot of the stuff that we've already built. That can, I feel, sometimes inspire a not as positive dialogue, like
Mm.
where having it from top down almost inspires that sense of leading from the front, that our product leads and engineering leads really want us to make sure that we're delivering the best product that we can.
Mm.
So that's personally how I found it. Yeah.
You
So
mentioned you don't believe in technical debt. That's what do you
I
mean
feel like
by
it's
that?
no. So it's more so the terminology. Like,
Okay.
I don't really enjoy the terminology technical debt. I feel like that implies that things were potentially put there intentionally to not function properly, or it's I don't know. It's not a positive frame of mind that you enter a piece of work in. I feel it's more of a mental thing, an approach thing, rather than necessarily a sort of technical thing or a work thing itself.
I hear you, because a lot of the time when you're on a product team, like you make the best decision that you can at the time with the resources
Yeah.
that you have, and that is inevitably like in a year and a half, in 18 months' time, that's the the work is going to accrue a technical debt anyway, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's just the way that things happen. Like, you can't really help that. That's just the way that software development works. And speaking of software development, I actually have another question for you, which is sort of maybe a harder one. I don't know if you'll be able to necessarily uh, answer this one, but like, you're talking about, to just go back to sort of accountability
Mhm.
and sort of composition of small teams. I feel like that really makes things not difficult necessarily for recruitment, but there's a lot of pressure on building your team in the right way to be able to supplement that culture and that way of working. So,
Mhm.
do you have any advice for any organizations, teams, or even team leads who are building those teams, as to how you would, like, in terms of experience, junior, associate, senior staff, like, how would you comprise a team to work as effectively as possible?
I think one of the most important aspects is to kind of make sure that 20% rule runs throughout your company. So make sure that those feedback loops are happening, not too often, but like say like on a quarterly basis. You've got that ability for people to say when things aren't working. So I think that gives you the sort of the assurance to be able to make the decision to structure your team in potentially a way that you haven't thought about before, and you've got that feedback loop, so you know whether or not it's working. Is that from the perspective of a team lead, or from like a more sort of...
Yeah, from a team lead, in the sense of like, say I was a team lead and I want to build a team which will, one, support the initial needs of the business or the organization, wherever I'm working, the mission, let's say the mission, right? But also something that you want to try to grow sustainably and then can also split out again, rather than it being sort of a very tactical focused team. Like, how would you in your like, how would you comprise that team? How would you build that team?
I think they need to... you'd want at least a third of the team to be focused on you want at least a third of the team to be new. You wouldn't want to kind of come into the situation. Of course, it's really good when everyone knows how each other works and you've got like a good sense of understanding. But I think you need a fresh perspective, and whether or not that's someone from outside of your core function, or whether or not it's someone from outside of your team, whether or not it's someone from outside the business. I think if you're kind of pulling together a new team, you've got a really exciting opportunity to bring in a fresh perspective, and doing that with a couple of people can just really help you to challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
I think the tendency is always to lean a bit more. The tendency is to almost compose your team to a more senior level, and then I think you kind of need to kind of go back and sense check that yourself and kind of bring that down a little bit, because it's easy to want to throw in the best possible people with the most knowledge. Like, of course, you want all A string, right? You want like the best possible people, but I think it's pulling back and just remembering that you need a few people with mixed levels of ability, so they can grow into the project and maybe and hopefully like take it forward and maintain it. Did you compile a lot of teams when you were working and your product management head? Like, how
No,
did
I mean,
you...
it was always interesting to just sort of watch it, and I feel like and I've just been watching like other engineering leads, sort of how they build their team and everything too, and some take very different approaches. But I guess also it does depend on things like time constraint, the available funds that you have in terms of what you can offer, in terms of opportunities, but also like, what level of growth that you're expecting and in what time. I think that makes a huge difference too, because obviously if you need to get the job done very quickly and there's a huge deadline looming that you can't shake, obviously like getting your A team out there as quickly as possible does make sense. But, if you have that room for growth, then I think you're right. Like having that sort of third focused on that piece of delivery and then like growing things around you, I think that's really, really important there. So just to shift gear a little bit, because you mentioned a term which I'm not really too familiar with too much, which was tacit communication, like being able to communicate effectively in that sense. Do you have any recommendations on tools or best practices to be able to achieve tacit communication there?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of the time, it's something that I'm still learning about. Like the League of Legends study, there are a couple of studies that were carried out by MIT, and they're super interesting. I'll send you a couple links to them. But I think we do a lot of it instinctively, and through understanding each other and our ways of working and being really explicit in the first phase of a project, you can kind of you can get a sense of people's working patterns. But also, I think when it comes to constructing CI/CD processes, we we often have like if you've got an automated test suite and you've got like a Slack bot that's telling you when like a new deploy has happened, or like giving you your like feeding back like when your tests have passed, or even if it's just kind of feeding you alerts from your GitLab instance, like I think we forget that when everyone went into lockdown, it was so quick. We wanted to exchange meetings like for like. You know, we wanted to have where we'd usually sit down and like walk past someone and have a quick conversation about the status of something. We'd want to replace that with a meeting, and sometimes it's not always necessary. I'm not trying to argue for and we shouldn't talk to each other. Of course, we should talk to each other, but I think there's a tendency to kind of to throw in too many meetings into the mix, and then and then when people throw their hands up and say, "I've got so many meetings, I can't actually do the work that I've got to do," there's pushback around. That's just the nature of the job. You've become senior in your role. Like leadership comes with meetings, and yeah, I think we need to kind of remember that a lot of the processes that we instill and a lot of the automation that we build into the things that we work on involves implicit communication. And plus, like PRs, that's communication. We've got
I just merged them. I don't know what communication is. Just hit merge. It's fine. I get so last one for me. So obviously, like we've got a lot of automation that happens, and we're sort of shifting into a very sort of patternistic automated world and everything too. But let's compile that with the fact that we also have something like the pandemic to deal with, and the world is going much more remote. Like how can you we talk about instinct, right? How can you almost instill that level of instinct amongst remote working and all the automation and integration capabilities that we have today?
And so that instinct is like in what sense? Like in
so almost being able to predict or assume your colleagues' behavior, like your peers' behavior, but also communication style, and being able to work in that way where you almost have that autonomy. Like how can you really manage that when you have those few factors?
Sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
it sounds really boring when I say it out loud, but Puppet's State of DevOps report that came out in September, towards the end of last year, well, end of last year. They kind of talked about how teams that define their interactions perform better overall. And I know that this is a stat you've probably read it a million times, and defining your interaction sounds quite boring, but if we lower that cognitive load of like if something goes wrong, you know who to speak to, and things are documented, and each member of the team has a small little user manual. They filled out their Slack profile. I know it sounds really boring, but a lot of the time we can't really. But do you use huddles much at work? Do you use like Discord channels and huddles much?
we don't as much. I feel like we should, but we also have various other ways of sort of, I don't know. I guess so. Like our office is opening up again soon, so there's a lot of interaction there. But we do try to over communicate quite a lot because we're on Slack and because a lot of us are remote as well and everything too. But I don't know how much we fill out our Slack profiles or anything like that.
I know it sounds a bit like robotic, fill out your Slack profiles and stuff, but I don't know the amount of times that we do a lot of problem solving on our own, I find. And I know it's one thing that I found with the newest edition of the DevOps handbook. There are a lot of case studies that have like occurred over the past 18 months, and so many of them talk about how we've had to adapt to promote working, and it seems like such a shift. But in this event I was working on last month, I think Patrick Dubois said, like, he was talking about how when it comes to the world of open source, remote teams have always been there. You've never been able to speak to that person in Denmark that's updating like their branch. You can't. You've just got that layer of separation, and yeah, I think like just being really explicit and defining your interactions can help make the next one easier, and so on and so on. It's like the end to the power of two, but like reverse. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. No, I think that you're right. I think that basically, I think the term lightening that cognitive load and just sort of making it as easy as possible for people to build those bridges and plug those gaps. I think that, you know, it's our responsibility to try and, if we can, do it. And I think that it's not a boring answer. It's a very simple answer. And sometimes the simplest answers are the best answers, right? So yeah, I'm going to update my Slack profile after this. So Jessica, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. And I will bid you adieu, but thank you very much again for kicking things off, and looking forward to rewatching this later as well.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the next one. We've got is it someone from HashiCorp coming to February, or am I skipping ahead?
I think maybe, but we do have lots in the calendar. I think that we have, I need to actually check the calendar. But no, we have lots and lots lined up. And also we have some stuff lined up in March, especially, which is particularly exciting. So yes, please keep your eyes and ears open. But thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.
Please follow Jessica on social media. She tweets about some great stuff, and also will be able to answer your questions online and offline too. In addition to that, if you do have any more questions about anything that Jessica's spoken about today, please do head to the Discord channel and ask away when you watch this retrospectively. But until then, please do keep an eye on our Twitter account and also in the Discord server for any of our next talks which are coming up. We do quite a number, and we've got a lot of chapters also available to us worldwide. So please do check us out there. But until then, I've been Waleed, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, whether you were live or whether you're watching this recorded, and we'll see you real soon. Take care.